Being in the Navy, you get to see a lot of the world, and with 2 deployments currently under my belt, I have seen a lot of crazy things. However, this occurred during my last deployment, and it's a moment that I will never forget. Not just due to the fact that it left me physically shaken, but there was no explanation for what we saw that night. For security and privacy reasons, I will not be discussing the name or type of ship that I was stationed on. I hope you all can understand. I had watch from midnight to 4 in the morning, and my watch station is in a little area right behind the bridge. In this area, I was the supervisor of a small team of 4 others, making sure that they did their job properly, which was to make sure that we knew what other ships are out there, who they are, and where they come from. The midnight watch is usually pretty boring, as nothing really happens around that time. The bridge team tends to keep to themselves around that time, and only come to bug us when they have questions about a ship, or any possible ships in the area. We had one person out on the bridge though, to talk to the lookouts, which are people stationed around the ship that made visual reports to the bridge on the other ships, or any marine life that could be near us. To ensure that I knew what the lookouts were reporting, I had a speaker hooked up to the station that the lookouts used to talk to each other and make reports. Usually during this time, the lookouts like to talk about nonsense and gossip amongst each other. I will admit, a lot of their conversations were funny. On this particular night, however, one of the lookouts made a report to the bridge, and I knew something was wrong because she sounded extremely nervous. Here is the initial report. Bridge, Port Fantail. Go ahead, Port Fantail. Bridge, the water behind us is glowing. Say again? I can't explain it in any other way, but the water is glowing. What? I said to myself as I went out onto the bridge and talked to my guy out there, making sure he heard what I had heard as well. We both reported it to the junior officer of the watch, and he thought it was weird as well, but claimed that it might be a bioluminescent algae, which, although extremely common, it made sense at the time. I told my guy to pass the word back to the lookout in hopes it would calm her down. As I walked back to my station, I heard the lookouts talking to the speaker, teasing and making fun about how her reporting of a glowing algae. After that, all seemed normal. About 20 minutes later, I heard the lookout come out again, this time talking to one of the other lookouts. Starboard Fantail, Port Fantail. Yeah. Do you see the water glowing in the distance? Yeah, what about it? I think it's following us. You're stupid. No, seriously, look at it. We passed it about 20 minutes ago. We shouldn't be able to see it anymore. You're either really tired or really paranoid. You need to calm down. After that, the lookout again reported it to the bridge, and this time, the junior officer of watch told him to pass word to inform him when the glowing algae got closer. I went outside to check myself, and I did indeed see it. Although it could be nothing, I was a bit on edge also. Then, out of nowhere, I visually see the glow rapidly get closer to the ship, coming in from behind. I ran back inside and I heard the lookouts making the report. But before I could inform the bridge, the water around the ship started to glow. The glowing faded slowly, then got brighter every few seconds, and everyone on the bridge was completely dumbfounded. No one moved or spoke, just stood in place, watching as the bridge filled in and out with an ominous green glow. This went on for a couple of minutes, but felt like an eternity. I don't know what others were thinking, but I honestly thought that this was the end. We then watched as whatever was glowing beneath the ship slowly move away from us, moving ahead of us. Then, in a sudden flash of light, it was completely gone. Everyone on the bridge remained silent for about another minute, and even though everybody was shaken up, we all tried to get past it, and many went on like it never happened. Since there was no official report of the incident, and since it was never passed down to the other watches, This event technically never happened, except to those who witnessed it, which happens more than you think. The captain was never informed on what happened either. I have not been able to stop thinking about that day, and I haven't told anyone about it. Not even to my wife and family. Not because they won't believe me, but because they worry about me constantly when I'm out at sea. So I kept it to myself until now. I just wanted to share in what my experience was and pass the word that there is something in the ocean. What is it? I don't know, and that truly terrifies me. The most deadly shark attack in recorded history began on July 30th, 1945. The U.S.S. Indianapolis, a Portland-class heavy cruiser of the United States Navy, was taking part in a top-secret mission of the utmost importance. It was tasked with carrying enriched uranium to an island in the South Pacific, along with other parts required for the assembly of the world's first deployable atomic bomb. As history shows, the crew of the Indianapolis were successful in their mission, completing the delivery in record speeds that are unbroken, even by modern naval vessels. However, as they sailed back towards Leyte for training before the invasion of Okinawa, tragedy struck. Just after midnight on July 30th, the Indianapolis was spotted by a Japanese submarine. Without any escorts to defend her, the Indianapolis was a prime target, and the Japanese closed in for the kill. The Indianapolis did not have sonar to detect submarines. They were completely unaware of the danger in which they found themselves. At exactly 12:15 a.m., 2 Type 95 torpedoes smashed into the right side of the vessel, instantly killing dozens of American sailors and causing obscene amounts of damage to the ship's structure. It took just 12 minutes of panic and terror for the ship to sink completely, taking down over 300 of the crew along with her. The surviving crew members, lacking life jackets and lifeboats, were set adrift among the waves in almost complete darkness. Many thought the worst was over, but their nightmare had only just begun. Naturally, the sailors floating among the debris were expecting to be rescued in a matter of hours, days at most, but the horrible fact was that nobody was coming to the rescue. Despite sending several emergency signals before the ship went down, the Navy had somehow lost track of the Indianapolis. Nothing was made of the fact that the ship failed to arrive at Leyte, and many of the emergency messages that were received by nearby ships and naval bases were completely ignored. Declassified records later showed that one such commander in the Philippines was drunk and had told his staff to not disturb him. Another wrongly assumed the SOS calls were some kind of Japanese trap. The roughly 900 men who actually survived the torpedo attack were now exposed to a new, perhaps even deadlier danger. It was dawn when the survivors saw the first sharks in the waters around them. The pure carnage and chaos of the sinking had attracted hundreds of oceanic white-tip and tiger sharks from miles around. Some were apparently as large as 15 feet long. It must have been absolutely terrifying for the survivors, seeing huge dorsal fins emerging from the water as the predators began to surround them, circling, picking out the weakest links, those too weak to struggle. At first, the sharks focused on the dead bodies floating in the water. Many men had died of exposure, salt poisoning, or thirst, and it was these corpses that provided the easiest meals for the circling sharks. But soon, the lifeless bodies among the survivors have been completely devoured by the hungry predators, and it wasn't long before they turned their attention towards the living. The survivors later reported that they were losing at least 3 or 4 men to a shark attack every single day. At some points, they counted 20 to 30 sharks in the water, their dorsal fins breaking the waves to form an almost impenetrable barrier around the surviving sailors. The sharks would often swim towards the survivors, bumping into them to test for signs of life. The sailors never knew exactly when the attacks would come, and this took a serious toll on their sanity. Men would kick and pound the water, screaming bloody murder in an attempt to deter the sharks from attacking. But this only served to attract more and more of the fishy fiends, as it mimicking the thrashing of a wounded sea creature that served as a natural dinner bell for the hungry beasts. Every so often, a shark would lose patience and strike without mercy, rushing up from the briny depths to drag down a screaming survivor. Imagine it, hearing the man next to you let out an ear-splitting, blood-curdling scream before disappearing beneath the waves, never to be seen again. Some survivors recalled that the elements were perhaps just as deadly as the circling sharks. During the scorching heat of the daytime, men would pray for darkness, their faces blistering as the harsh Pacific sun beat down upon them, while at night, the water grew so cold that their teeth would shatter as hypothermia set in. Some would kick their legs and thrash their arms in futile attempts to keep warm. But again, this only mimicked the death throes of a wounded sea creature, making them a target for the circling sharks. As the floating sailors fought to survive, many of them succumbed to the horror of their experiences and began to lose their minds. Some men even began to hallucinate, seeing islands that weren't there, claiming they had heard rescue planes searching them in the skies above. One such surviving sailor recalls the heartbreaking moment that one of his shipmates finally lost his grip on his sanity. The man claimed he could see the Indianapolis floating in the water just a few feet below them, and that he could access the mess hall's stores of purified water. He made repeated trips beneath the surface, inviting his comrades to join him in drinking the cool, fresh water he had found. But the man was drinking salt water. He died shortly afterwards from the effects of poisoning. Then, on the fourth day of their harrowing survival, a Navy seaplane happened to be passing overhead when they spotted the groups of surviving sailors floating in the waters below. One of the aircraft's crew members leaned out of the central hatch, waving down at the men. That's when the tears came. Tears of pure relief and salvation. They were saved, but out of the crew of almost 1,200 sailors, just 317 survived the ordeal. But for some, the horror, pain, and tragedy of the sinking would never end. Captain Charles McVeigh, commander of the Indianapolis, was one of the last abandoned of the ship sinking. In November of 1945, he was court-martialed for failing to order his men to abandon ship in time, resulting in the 300 or so sailors that sank with the ship to the bottom of the ocean. Cleared of this charge, he was instead convicted of hazardizing the ship, a naval term which describes the failure of a captain to properly maneuver his vessel to avoid the likelihood of a direct torpedo strike. Yet, aspects of the trial were controversial, as even the commander of the Japanese sub that sank the ship said that zigzagging the Indianapolis wouldn't have made a damn bit of difference, and that he'd always found a way to sink her. The disgraced captain was cleared of all charges, was reinstated to his position, and retired as a rear admiral 4 years later, in 1949. Yet, while many of the Indianapolis' survivors agreed that Captain McVeigh was not to blame for the ship's sinking, the sentiment was not shared by some of the grieving families of the fallen sailors. Captain McVeigh would often receive Christmas cards from the relatives of his dead crew members, but they did not have a remotely festive tone about them. "Merry Christmas, you son of a bitch. Our family's holiday would be a lot merrier if you hadn't murdered my son," read one card that McVeigh had received as late as 1960. Despite being cleared of blame, Captain McVeigh never forgave himself for his failures as a commander, even if it was during the most brutal and decisive war that mankind has ever known. Eventually, in 1968, McVeigh picked up a small toy sailor that reminded him of his naval service, walked out onto his front lawn, and shot himself with the very same revolver that the Navy had issued to him upon entry into the service. He was 70 years old. Over 23 years later, the largest war in human history had senselessly claimed yet another life.